Atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On 6 and 9 August 1945, states detonated two atomic bombs over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bombings killed between 1,50,000 and 2,46,000 people, most of whom were civilians, and remain the only use of nuclear weapons in an armed conflict. Japan surrendered to the Allies on 15 August, 6 days after the bombing of Nagasaki and the Soviet Union's declaration of war against Japan and invasion of Japanese occupied Manchuria. The Japanese government signed the instrument of surrender on 12 September, effectively ending the war. In the final year of World War II, the Allies prepared for a costly invasion of the Japanese mainland. This undertaking was preceded by a conventional bombing and firebombing campaign that devastated 64 Japanese cities. The war in the European theatre concluded when Germany surrendered on 8 May 1945, and the Allies turned their full attention to the Pacific War. By July 1945, the Allies' Manhattan Project had produced two types of atomic bombs: Little Boy, an enriched uranium gun-type fission weapon, and Fat Man, a plutonium implosion type nuclear weapon. The 509th Composite Group of the United States Army Air Forces was trained and equipped with the specialized silver plate version of the Boeing B-29 Super Fortress and deployed to Tinian in the Mariana Islands. The Allies called for the unconditional surrender of the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces in the Potsdam Declaration on 26 July 1945, the alternative being prompt and utter destruction. The Japanese government ignored the ultimatum. The consent of the United Kingdom was obtained for the bombing, as was required by the Quebec Agreement, and orders were issued on 25 July by General Thomas Handy, the acting Chief of Staff of the United States Army, for atomic bombs to be used against Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata and Nagasaki. These targets were chosen because they were large urban areas that also held military significant facilities. On 6th August, a little boy was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a fat man was dropped on Nagasaki. Over the next 2 or 4 months, the effects of the atomic bombing killed 90,000 to 1,66,000 people in Hiroshima and 60,000 to 80,000 people in Nagasaki. Roughly half occurred on the first day. For months afterward, many people continued to die from the effects of burns, radiation sickness and other injuries, compounded by illness and malnutrition. Though Hiroshima had a sizable military garrison, most of the dead were civilians. Scholars have extensively studied the effects of the bombing on the social and political character of subsequent world history and popular culture, and there is still much debate concerning the ethical and legal justification for the bombings. According to supporters, the atomic bombing were necessary to bring an end to the war with minimal casualties and ultimately prevented a greater loss of life. According to critics, the bombings were unnecessary for the war's end and were a war crime, raising moral and ethical implications. Background: Pacific War. In 1945, the Pacific War between the Empire of Japan and the Allies entered its fourth year. Most Japanese military units fought fiercely, ensuring that the Allied victory would come to at an enormous cost. The 1.25 million battle casualties incurred in total by the United States in World War II included both military personnel killed in action and wounded in action. Nearly 1 million of the casualties occurred during the last year of the war, from June 1944 to June 1945. In December 1944, American battle casualties hit an all-time monthly high of 88,000 as a result of the German Ardennes offensive. Worried by the losses sustained, President Roosevelt suggested the use of atomic bombs on Germany as soon as possible, but was informed the first usable atomic weapons were still months away. America's reserves of manpower were running out. Deferments for groups such as agricultural workers were tightened. and there was consideration of drafting women. At the same time, the public was becoming war weary and demanding that long serving servicemen be sent home. In the Pacific, the Allies returned to the Philippines, recaptured Burma, and invaded Borneo. Offensives were undertaken to reduce the Japanese forces remaining in Bougainville, New Guinea, and the Philippines. In April 1945, American forces landed on Okinawa, where heavy fighting continued until June. Along the way, the ratio of Japanese to American casualties dropped from 5 to 1 in the Philippines to 2 to 1 on Okinawa. Although some Japanese soldiers were taken prisoner, most fought until they were killed or committed suicide. Nearly 1999% of the 28,000 defenders of Iwo were killed. Of the 1,17,000 Okinawan and Japanese troops defending Okinawa in April to June 1945, 94% were killed. 7,401 Japanese soldiers surrendered, an unprecedentedly large number. As the Allies advanced towards Japan, conditions became steadily worse for the Japanese people. Japan's merchant fleet declined from 52,50,000 gross registered tons in 1941 to 15,60,000 tons in March 1945 and 5,57,000 tons in August 1945. The lack of raw materials forced the Japanese war economy into a steep decline after the middle of 1944. The civilian economy, which had slowly deteriorated throughout the war, reached disastrous levels by the middle of 1945. The loss of shipping also affected the fishing fleet. At the 1945 catch was only 22% of that in 1941. The 1945 rice harvest was the worst since 1909, and hunger and malnutrition became widespread. US industrial production was overwhelmingly superior to Japan's by 1943. The US produced almost 1 lakh aircraft a year compared to Japan's production of 70,000 for the entire war. In February 1945, Prince Fumimaro Konoe advised Emperor Hirohito that defeat was inevitable and urged him to abdicate. Preparations to invade in Japan. Even before the surrender of Nazi Germany on 8 May 1945, plans were underway for the longest operation of the Pacific War, Operation Downfall. The Allied invasion of Japan. The operation had two parts, set to begin in October 1945. Operation Olympic involved a series by landings by the US 6th Army intended to capture the southern third of the southernmost main Japanese island, Kyushu. This was to be followed in March 1946 by Operation Coronet, the capture of the Kanto Plain near Tokyo on the main Japanese island of Honshu by the US 1st, 8th and 10th Armies as well as the Commonwealth Corps made up of Australian, British and Canadian divisions. The target date was chosen to allow for Olympic to complete its objectives, for troops to be redeployed from Europe and the Japanese winter to pass. Japan's geography made the invasion plan obvious to the Japanese. They were able to predict the Allied invasion plans accurately and thus adjust their defensive plan. Operation Ketsugo accordingly. The Japanese planned an all-out defense of Kyushu with little left in reserve. In all, there was 2.3 million Japanese armies troops prepared to defend the home islands, backed by a civilian militia of 28 million. Casualty predictions varied widely but were extremely high. The Vice Chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy General Staff, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, predicted up to 20 million Japanese deaths. The Americans were alarmed by the Japanese buildup, which was accurately tracked through ultra-intelligence. On 15 June 1945, a study by the Joint War Plans Committee, drawing on the experience of the Battle of Leyte, estimated that downfall would result in 1,32,500 to 2,20,000 US casualties, within US dead and missing in the range from 27,500 to 50,000. Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson commissioned his own study by Quincy Wright and William Shockley, who estimated the invading allies would suffer between 1.7 and 4 million casualties, of whom between 4 lakh and 8 lakh would be dead. while Japanese fatalities would have been around 5 to 10 million. In a meeting with the President and commanders on June 18, 1945, General George C. Marshall stated that there was reason to believe casualties for the first 30 days would not exceed the price paid for Luzon. Additionally, with the Japanese position rendered hopeless by an invasion of their mainland, Marshall speculated that Soviet entry into the war would be the decisive action needed to finally them into capitulation. Marshall began contemplating the use of a weapon that was readily available and which assuredly can decrease the cost in American lives: poison gas. Quantities of phosgene, mustard gas, tear gas, and cyanogen chloride were moved to Luzon from stockpiles in Australia and New Guinea in preparation for Operation Olympic, and MacArthur ensured that chemical warfare service units were trained in their use. Consideration was also given to using biological weapons. Plans for more atomic attacks on Japan. There were plans for further attacks on Japan following Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Groves expected to have another Fat Man atomic bomb ready for use on 19th August, with 3 more in September and a further 3 in October. A second Little Boy bomb would not be available until December 1945. On 10th August, he sent a memorandum to Marshall in which he wrote that the next bomb should be ready for delivery on the first suitable weather after 17th or 18th August. The memo today contains a written comment written by Marshall. It is not to be released over Japan without express authority from the President. At the cabinet meeting that morning, Truman discussed these actions. James Forrestal paraphrased Truman as saying, "There will be further dropping of the atomic bomb." While Henry A. Wallace recorded in his diary that Truman said he had given orders to stop atomic bombing, he said the thought of wiping out another 1 lakh people was too horrific. He did not like the idea of killing. As he said, all those kids, the previous order that the target cities were to be attacked with atomic bombs as made ready was thus modified. There was already discussion in the War Department about conserving the bombs then in production for Operation Downfall, and Marshall suggested to Stimson that the remaining cities on the target list be spared attack with atomic bombs. 2 more Fat Man assemblies were readied and scheduled to leave Kirtland Field for Tinian on 11 and 14 August, and Tibbets was ordered by Lime to return to Albuquerque, New Mexico to collect them. At Los Alamos, technicians worked 24 hours straight to cast another plutonium core. Although cast, it still needed to be pressed and coated, which would take until 16th August. Therefore, it could have been ready for use on 19th August. Unable to reach Marshall, Groves ordered on his own authority on 13th August that the core should not be shipped.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
Surrender of Japan and subsequent occupation. Until 9th August, Japan's War Council still insisted on its 4 conditions for surrender. The full cabinet met at 14:30 on 9th August and spent most of the day debating surrender. Anami considered that victory was unlikely but argued in favor of continuing the war. The meeting ended at 17:30 with no decision having been reached. Suzuki went to the palace to report on the outcome of the meeting, where he met with Koichi Kido, the Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal of Japan. Kido informed him that the emperor had agreed to hold an imperial conference and gave a strong indication that the emperor would consent to surrender on condition that the Kokutai be preserved. A second cabinet meeting was held at 18th. Only 4 ministers support Anami's position of adhering to the 4 conditions, but since cabinet decision had to be unanimous, no decision was reached before it ended at 22 p.m. Calling an imperial conference required the signatures of the prime minister and the two service chiefs, but the chief cabinet secretary Hisatsune Sakomizu had already obtained signatures from Toyoda and General Yoshijiro Umezu in advance, and he reneged on his promise to inform them if a meeting was to be held. 12th August, the emperor informed the imperial family of his decision to surrender. One of his uncles, Prince Asaka, asked whether the war would be continued if the Kokutai could not be preserved.